Hi, and welcome to 5 Questions with Lauren Walsh. My name is Danielle Hartunian, and I am Associate Director of Alumni Relations at the Gallatin School of Individualized Study at NYU. Thank you for joining us for today's conversation, which is made in partnership with the NYU Alumni Association. Before we begin today's session, we just want to say on behalf of all of us at Gallatin and at NYU, we hope that you and your loved ones are healthy and safe and taking care during these uncertain times. We're thankful that you're here today, tuning in from wherever you are and whenever this video finds you. And we hope it helps you stay connected with Gallatin and the collective NYU community at large. With that, I'm thrilled to introduce to you our featured speaker today, Lauren Walsh, Faculty and Director of the Photojournalism Lab at Gallatin. Professor Walsh is co-editor of multiple volumes, including The Future of Text and Image, collected essays on literary and visual conjunctures, The Millennium Villages Project, and Macondo, Memories of the Colombian Conflict. Her newest book, Conversations on Conflict Photography, explores public responses to photographic coverage of war and humanitarian crises. Walsh is published in the Los Angeles Review of Books, Photography and Culture, the Journal of American History, and the New Republic, among others. She has appeared on CNN and other radio programs and was featured as an expert on photography in the documentary 9/11, 10 years later. Her research concentrates on questions of memory and visual media. She is interested in the politics and ethics of photography and the intersections of literature and visual culture. In addition to teaching at Gallatin, she is director of our Photojournalism Lab, as well as director of Lost Rolls America, a national archive of photography and memory. Lauren, welcome.
Hi, thanks so much for having me, Danielle.
Thanks for joining us. I'm so excited to talk to you about your work. We're just going to jump right into our first question. Why don't you tell us about yourself and your work? How did you come to be an expert on photography?
Good question. So, I guess telling you a little bit about myself and my work, the intro that you gave about me touched on a fair bit of it. So kind of the professional hats that I see myself wearing are, I'm a professor, I'm a writer, I'm a filmmaker, director of an archive, a photo archive called Lost Rolls America. And as you said, and of course right here at Gallatin, director of the Photojournalism Lab. In terms of my teaching, which is a core part of who I am and my own identity, my humanities classes, my seminars focus, I guess, broadly under the headings of visual culture studies and journalism, and specifically, as you might guess, on the medium of photography, and particularly ethics and photography. As far as how did I come to be an expert in this field, I think my fascination with photography goes back a very, very long time. I think fascinated is the best word, right? I'm fascinated by this medium that can be communication, documentation, expression, evidence, journalism. So my doctoral work focused in large part on photography, on photojournalism often. And outside of the classroom, I work on a lot of projects that are either about photography or with photography, and I'm often working with professionals in the industry. So kind of I have my academic peers, scholars, and then I have industry peers in the world of journalism. So that's maybe the quick answer.
Already a very Gallatin interdisciplinary approach with both the academic and the application. So my second question is, I just wanted to start also with the obvious, given our current situation in life right now. How has the global pandemic intersected with your work in the field of photojournalism at large? Your book, Conversations on Conflict Photography, comes to mind here.
Right. So, and I didn't say this in the description of who I am, but my particular field of specialty is conflict photography. And as you can tell by the title of the book, it focuses on conflict photography. But for me, conflict, I define it and think about it and explore it quite broadly. So conflict is, of course, wars and front lines. It's the kind of typical things that one thinks of when you hear the term conflict. But I am also in this book thinking about what happens when you step back from the front lines. What are the civilian tolls of conflict? Natural disasters, humanitarian crises, gender conflicts, political conflicts. So it's a book that focuses on all of those forms of conflict, and particularly how you show those stories visually through photography. So it's a book about the contemporary industry. It's a book about photojournalism in this moment, and it tackles a whole bunch of themes like the physical risks, particularly attendant to conflict photography, emotional tolls, forces that act as censors, the value of a single image in the age of image saturation, media literacy, public response, everything from apathy to engagement, and a whole lot more. So the book came out late last year, and this was before the pandemic hit and before it was on all of our radars. But of course, a lot of what I'm exploring in the book is directly pertinent now because COVID-19 it's a crisis, and it's a crisis of global historical proportions. So one of the ways in which this specifically intersects with my field of expertise is in terms of journalist safety. And I'll step back for a moment by way of saying a free and independent press is a bedrock of any functioning democracy. And having said that, it becomes easier to understand that journalists are essential workers. We in the news consuming public expect and rightfully expect to be kept informed no matter what is happening. And this is what we need. We need vetted, valuable, informative news that helps us to make decisions about what's going on in the world. And so journalists have to keep working, even when there are risks. So specifically with this pandemic, that means that there are health risks that journalists are facing. There are emotional risks that they're facing, particularly when you're covering stories that are very distressing, that have a lot of suffering. What's perhaps somewhat unique to this experience right now is that there are so many stories of people, of loved ones being separated from each other, even when there's a loved one who is sick, possibly even dying, not being able to connect with family. And that is immensely distressing to the people who are living it. And there's a kind of ancillary experience for the journalists who are close to it and covering it too. So I've been speaking with and working with individual photojournalists. I've been talking or giving talks for journalist organizations about things like that, physical safety, emotional safety in terms of covering the pandemic.
So thinking about that, as well as what you said about the civilian side of that lens, this is no doubt such a moment for photography right now, no matter which side of the lens you're on or how you slice that pie. I wonder, how are photographers and journalists taking advantage of the moment in terms of their work and in the field? And alternatively, are there any missed opportunities right now? Because things are changing so rapidly.
I mean, I think in terms of the specific moment of the pandemic, journalists are continuing to do the work that they do. And that means that there has been coverage by photojournalists that get us really close to dangerous but very, very important stories. So there's a photographer, Lorenzo Tognoli, who was covering in Italy when that was the hotspot and doing phenomenal coverage. If we're thinking more broadly, let's say beyond the moment of the pandemic, I tend to think of this in terms of how it affects photography and photographers. This is the age of the image, right? Like, it's an age of image saturation. Over 1 trillion photos are taken on a yearly basis. And so I think in terms of photojournalism broadly, some would say that that alone makes it harder for a given important photojournalistic image to rise above the visual noise, as it were. And there are many cases where that's likely true. But I think, on the other hand, this is also a moment where if an image is powerful and important, and if the timing is right, there is the potential for photojournalistic images to go viral. And I think that can be very useful in terms of stoking public discourse. So one of the examples of that would be, I think it's a photograph that everyone will recall if I just describe it. It's coming up on about 2 years ago that the photo was taken by a photographer named John Moore, who shoots for Getty Images. And it's a photograph from the US-Mexico border. And it shows a little girl from Honduras crying. She's an asylum seeker and she's with her mother. And you can also see US Border Patrol in the image. And it's an image that was published widely. And from there it went viral. And I think that's an example of an image that cut through the visual noise, and that also brought an enormous amount of attention and generated a lot of discussion about what was going on at that moment at the US-Mexico border. So I'm in kind of stepping back from that specific example and just thinking again broadly about this moment and photography right now. I think the fact of there being so many outlets and platforms for photography means that professional photographers have a better chance of finding a way of getting their important work out there and getting it seen, and I think that's really important. And then maybe the flip side of that, so I guess it's not necessarily a missed opportunity, but maybe more of a caveat, is that, I mean, all of us in the news consuming public, we are to some extent bombarded by visuals. So we see it in the news, we see it on social media, we're taking pictures all the time, we share pictures all the time. And not all of the images that we are seeing and consuming are created by professionals. So not every image is taken by someone who's trained in journalistic ethics and journalistic standards. So I think, and this maybe is the caveat in terms of the age of the image, would be that we, the public, have to learn to be really careful about how we receive and react to imagery. I think we need to learn to be critical readers of imagery. You know, which images do we trust? And this is, and I think I used the term before, media literacy. This is one of the reasons that I think that the need for media literacy is paramount right now.
Definitely agreed. I mean, just thinking about, I couldn't even name the number of how many images I consume every day. And I feel like for every one image I delete on my phone, I take like 9 more. So I think we could all learn something from that. And actually what you just described leads right into my next question, which is, what do you make of the balance between the amateur everyday photographer, let's say in Elmhurst, Queens, documenting their local neighborhood during quarantine versus the more iconic photographs that have been taken by professionals during times of crisis or conflict?
Yeah, I think this is one of the most crucial questions, especially under that broad heading of media literacy. So the professional journalist, as I was saying, serves a particular role, and that is to abide by journalistic ethics and to bring us, the broader public, information that can help us as a citizenry, that can keep us informed, and again, that helps us to make decisions about our lives and our world and our country. The amateur photography doesn't necessarily operate with those intentions in mind. I mean, citizen journalism, I think, can be very, very important. And there are cases where we can't underestimate the value of citizen journalism, right? Like there's no professional on site at that moment, but documentation was created and it is so meaningful. But even if we just step back from journalism, like the heading of journalism, and just think about the value of amateur photography, it's fantastic, especially if you're not misinterpreting it as journalism. It's so wonderful to have documentation of a moment in time, right? Documentation of what's happening in Elmhurst, Queens, or, I mean, to my mind, the kind of the way this played out for me specific to the pandemic is an Instagram account that we created for my class. So in early March, everyone, right, all of NYU and many other universities, we all got the notice that we were going to be moving to remote teaching. And I was teaching a class called Photographing Peace, group of 18, 19 students, and a really great bunch of students, really cohesive in our discussion. And so I set up an Instagram account for the class initially because I thought, okay, everyone is being sent home. We're being spread around the globe, and we're now going to only interact with each other in little boxes via Zoom on our computers. And won't that be a little bit distancing? And I wanted to create another space for us to feel united. And I thought, well, this is a course on photography, and Instagram lends itself so eminently to photography. So I created an Instagram account. It's called Peace Photos During COVID. And as I said, initially it was just to keep us united. And all I said to the students was just document what you're feeling, what you're experiencing, what you're seeing. There is no wrong photo. This is not about the quality of your photography because they are not professional photographers. It's not even a how-to course on how to take good pictures. And so it's a visual diary. And that's how it started. And then over time, over the weeks, and I will say the semester has ended, my students are continuing to contribute to the Instagram account. It became something so much more. It's in my, if I had to boil it down, I would say it is a living archive of what these students, but they also maybe more broadly represent, Gen Z. It's a living archive of what they are experiencing during something that is of historic proportion. And so you see the images that document stress, anxiety, sadness, loneliness, and then you also see the happy moments and the bonding with family members. We had what we liked to kind of affectionately refer to as our class pets, because we got to know everyone's cats and dogs and got to see them. And so I think that kind of documentation it serves a different purpose. It's not journalism, but I think it is so valuable to have a record of what a collective experienced during a period of time.
I love the Zoom pets. I don't have one personally, but I love seeing other people's. So right on that note, actually, I was going to say we're coming to an end here, but you touched on my last question, which is, if there are other recommendations you have, we'll definitely include the handle of your class's Instagram in our concluding slides so that folks can follow along long after this video. But I wonder, what other accounts or websites or any kind of recommendations you have that you'd like to share with us today.
Sure. Yeah, and I do encourage people to follow their Instagram account and see their experiences and cheer them along. We just had 2 of our students graduate yesterday. As far as other websites, as you'd guess, I read a lot of news. So the major news sites, but I'm also very interested in organizations that focus on journalism and the protection of journalism and journalist safety. I think there are a lot of threats to journalism in the present moment, and these are some of the organizations working to keep journalism protected and keep journalists safe. And those are the James Foley Foundation, the Committee to Protect Journalists, ACOS Alliance. In terms of my own, I guess, website, I'd be happy to have viewers check out my work, right? So my book, which is available on Amazon, it's at independent sellers as well, or my website, which is laurenwalsh.com, or to follow me. I think you have it on the screen, to follow me on Twitter or Instagram, and to engage also with my work and to reach out and give feedback on my work too.
Yeah, definitely. We'll include all that in the slide. I'll have to check it out myself. I can't wait to see the class Instagram. What was the title of your class?
The class is called Photographing Peace. And I mean, basically, like you say the phrase war photography, and certain kinds of images come to mind, you know, tanks or bodies.
Mhm.
And so the course was interested in not what are narratives of conflict, but what do narratives of peace look like? You know, what happens after a conflict ends, or what happens when peace is not as ideal as one would hope. And I think one of the cool things for us, at least with our Instagram account, was we kind of put our learning into practice, because it's a crisis. It's not a war, but it is a crisis. But my students were finding moments of peace, like in the midst of it.
I love that. I think it's definitely something, some balance we can all look for at this particular moment. So thank you for sharing, and thank you for taking the time to be with us today and answer some 5 questions. We really appreciate your time and your insight. You've given us so much to think about, so thank you.
Thanks, Danielle.
And thank you to all of you alums tuning in from home. We hope you learned something from this conversation today, and we look forward to connecting with you again at another 5 Questions With. If you have any questions or want to get in touch with Gallatin Alumni Relations, you can email us at gallatin.alumni@nyu.edu. Thanks so much and take care.